Whether we are talking about ancient history or modern history or political history right now that is still unfolding with the future very much to be determined by the decisions that leaders make here and now. When we talk about history in a hypothetical voice, when we talk about what we would have done, what decision we would have made, we are revealing something about ourselves. We may be revealing very little or nothing at all about political reality. But still, this type of hypothetical discussion, I think, can be tremendously meaningful. It can be tremendously important for all of the participants. And it can be important to look back on what you said just 6 months ago and to consider the extent to which maybe you were wrong. There were a whole lot of people on the left who were heaping scorn on Joe Biden. There still are. I still hear these voices from the left heaping scorn on Joe Biden, that Joe Biden did the wrong thing at all these different stages. I heard that from the left also about Afghanistan. Even the war in Afghanistan, Joe Biden, when he finally gave up and quit Afghanistan, there were obviously people on both the left and the right heaping scorn on Joe Biden, but the voices from the left were especially surreal to me. It's like, okay, all you guys were anti-war, anti-war, anti-war. And then when you figure out that being anti-war means you're going to lose the war, all of a sudden you're pro-war. It's a little bit strange. Well, I think it would be very meaningful for a lot of people, not just professional political commentators, to look back at what they said just 6 months ago about Russia, Ukraine, Western Europe versus Eastern Europe. And for a lot of us, it would be meaningful to look back. If, for example, each and every one of you in my audience, if each and every one of you in my audience had a YouTube channel that recorded what you said you would do, hypothetically, what you would have done if you had been Bill Clinton, if you had been George W. Bush, if you had been Barack Obama, if you had been Donald Trump, in relation to various crucial turning points in history, the crossroads, the fate of the world came to, however you want to put it. If you could look back on what you said and what you thought at that time, don't you think you would have a great deal to regret? So this is partly about learning about history. It's partly about learning from history as it unfolds. It's partly about deepening our understanding of politics. But it's also about deepening our understanding of ourselves by engaging in real self-criticism. And I want to warn you all against getting stuck in this trap, this cycle of thinking that you're fucking morally superior to the political leaders you're commenting on. That seems to be an addiction the left wing just cannot quit, where they think the main point of engaging in historical analysis, economic analysis, political analysis, military analysis, like the main point is just to establish that you and I, like I as the commentator on YouTube or I as the podcaster and you and the audience, that you and I are morally superior to George W. Bush, that we're morally superior to Joe Biden or whatever. What the fucking point? What is the point of cultivating this sense of moral superiority? And of course, what goes along with it is like intellectual superiority. Like, oh yeah, you and I know, we know what the right thing to have done was, unlike Barack Obama. A great example, really briefly, in economics, all the people on the left who think that they would have handled the 2008 crisis, the economic crisis Barack Obama inherited, when Barack Obama first came into office, that they would have handled that so much better than Barack Obama. Like, oh, Obama did it all wrong, bailing out the banks. Like, oh no. And of course, what's the claim here? Do you actually think you understand economics better than Barack Obama? Really? Really? I'm sorry. Some people in this audience do. Some of you, but the vast majority of people on the left have an even weaker understanding of economics than Barack Obama and the team of advisor he has, by far. But like, okay, so you think you're intellectually superior to Obama? You think you're morally superior? Well, are you willing to look back and really think through, hypothetically, what the fuck would have happened if your ideology had prevailed or if you personally had made these decisions? Very often, the answer is quite dark. Very often, what you have to reflect on is the extent to which you were wrong. And some quite mentally mediocre people in positions of power, maybe they made the right call. I utterly despise Barack Obama. I think Barack Obama was an imbecile. I despise him intellectually. I despise him ethically, but nevertheless, his economic strategy, his bailout package, it worked. And I was the world's most careful critic of the Obama bailout package because I had really studied what happened in Japan when Japan had a comparable but not identical situation, so-called quantitative easing, right? The history of that, looking at American quantitative easing versus Japanese quantitative easing. I was really keenly aware of all this stuff, and to some extent, formally studied it in university. So I was very critical of the decisions Obama were making, but I can admit that his decisions got results, and I can admit that if Obama had done what I, in my heart of hearts, wish I could have done in that scenario, right? I can admit that there would have been very serious disadvantages to my strategy. There would be some advantages. I could talk, but right? You can't learn if you're not willing to admit that you were wrong. Present tense, you can't learn unless you're willing to admit that you are wrong. Sometimes factually wrong, sometimes strategically wrong, right? Like just sometimes technically wrong, but yes, sometimes morally wrong. Sometimes you have to admit you were the bad guy. You would have been the bad guy. You are the bad guy. Sometimes you have to admit there's some evil on your side as well. Enough preamble. There are two parts to this video. One is real brief. One's a little bit longer and more in depth. What would I have done if I had been Vladimir Putin, pursuing his agenda, pursuing the outcomes he desired? And what would I have done if I were Joe Biden, in Joe Biden's position? Because the conflict we are talking about now, shamefully, is a duel between Joe Biden and Vladimir Putin. I wish I could tell you that what France decides is really going to matter. I wish I could tell you we had some kind of participatory democracy in which, what the common people think is going to matter, what 51% of people in America think is going to matter. But it's not true. I mean, America has a mixed constitutional system, to say the least. Yeah, right. Tell this guy about it. We get a frontispiece here. I finally got there. We go. A handsome portrait of the man who really wrote the Constitution of the United States of America. There you go, baby. Governor Morris, the éminence grise behind the American Constitution. Nobody wants to talk about. And what he did in France in the French Revolution is really worth knowing and really worth talking about too. At any rate, the United States of America itself internally is not democratic enough that the opinions of anyone other than Joe Biden really matters. Obviously, like China is not democratic enough that anyone's opinion matters other than Xi Jinping. Nobody really thinks. Oh, gee, what do you think 51% of people in China have to say about this? Nobody even asks or entertains the notion. And right now, you're seeing in Russia just how little the opinion of the majority matters. So we are talking about a pitcher's duel. It's rare that I use a sports metaphor, but the reason I'm saying that, a pitcher's duel, right? So baseball is a game where many dozens of people are involved. It's not one man alone who plays baseball. But there can be some games where the two pitchers are so dominant, they're just such great pitchers, they're striking out all the batters, that strategically or effectively, it becomes a duel between just two men. It's a duel between the two pitchers, and nobody else in that game really does anything decisive or that matters. So yes, in this sense, it has become a very strange sort of duel between Joe Biden and Vladimir Putin. And this is in part because there are other players in the game who have decided to step back and say they are not going to lift a fucking finger. So this will come up again when I discuss what I would do from Joe Biden's perspective. Japan is in a position to do something decisive. They have decided they won't. India is in a position to do something decisive. They have decided they won't. Now, within Europe, it's a very high stakes game. What do you think the Netherlands can do? What do you think the Dutch can do? What's the maximum and what's the minimum? Right? That's hard. The Dutch could do something. The Dutch could take some risks here. They could stick their necks out. Right? And we can go through a whole long list of these smaller countries in Europe and ask, hey guys, who wants to be a hero? You guys may not know this. Italy has a surprisingly large military and a surprisingly large military budget. It's no joke, the Italian army. Okay, Italy, what do you have that army for? Now, it's a little bit surreal to talk about Turkey, what Turkey could do, and so on. But my point is, there are many players in this game who could matter, right? It's like you could say to these people, if they were gathered in one room, your opinion will only matter if you make it matter. And none of them want to. Emmanuel Macron, the leader of France, he kind of puts on a pantomime show. He is not going to make his opinion matter. Then we get into the smaller countries. And it's not just about big versus small, right? It's about risk. It's about consequences. How much can Sweden risk? And to what extent can Sweden endure the consequences of a more defiant or more provocative anti-Russian position? For the United States, obviously, it's relatively low risk. And there are a lot of those other countries in Europe. They can fuck around and find out, but they may have real reason to be afraid of what it is they're going to find out if they try. In the parlance of our times. Okay, so the scenario for Putin and what I would do if I were in Putin's position is very simple. Putin actually had a very strong card to play. He had a very strong strategy he could have used because he initially adopted this blitzkrieg methodology of just marching very rapidly from Belarus to Kiev. So we could have made that initial march, this initial shocking short-term conquest. He could have declared that a victory, stated what it is he wants to negotiate about, or, for example, what kind of international observers he wants to bring in, and then turned around and marched out. And he could say, look, I've proven my point. I've proven that at any time I can conquer the capital city of Ukraine. I marched my troops down. They got to the suburbs of Kiev. I mean, they did start conquering the city of Kiev. And now, like we were briefly all the way in, now we're all the way out. That would create the convincing illusion that he can effortlessly conquer Ukraine. As you may have noticed in the last 6 months, that illusion has been dispelled. We can now see just how difficult it is for him to follow through on the threat of truly conquering even 50%. Well, okay, 50% of Ukraine, not counting Crimea. If you count Crimea, the percentage, what percentage of Ukraine has he already conquered? It's very significant. But at any rate, he has demonstrated now his very real weakness. Whereas this brief invasion, blitzkrieg, marching all the way to the gates of Kiev, if you like, and then withdrawing, that projects an image of strength. And I would even go so far as to say it's real strength. There's real strength in that. You still have your whole army intact. You pull your army back into Belarus on one side, you pull it back into Russia on the other. And now, what would I suggest he demands? I would suggest that he demands international observers be sent in to have a legitimate, internationally recognized referendum on the future of each of these disputed territories. We say, look, Russia has demonstrated its point. At any time, they can resolve this through force. In just a few days, wow, you marched in and you nearly conquered the capital. And now you are saying, hey, you Western democracies, we want to play by your rules, but you won't let us. When we have a referendum in which the vast majority of people in Crimea declare that they want the future of Crimea to be with Russia, or they want the future of Crimea to be an independent country, but at any rate, that the people of Crimea do not want to be part of Ukraine. You all say it's a sham election, it's a sham referendum, it's not legitimate. Okay, well, we demand that you send in a team of experts. They can be Swiss, they can be Australian, whatever. You put together this group of experts who will come in and stage manage a legitimate referendum that you will recognize and we will recognize and everyone will recognize, a legitimate referendum that will seal the fate, that will determine the fate of Crimea. And then we can do another one in Donbass. We can do another one in Luhansk. They may have a list because actually there are quite a few other territories Russia has disputed this way. And then you have both the carrot and the stick. Like, okay, you say you believe in legitimate democracy. Well, we are demanding legitimate democracy. We are demanding that democracy legitimate this geopolitical situation and thus put an end to the conflict. So this is democracy precluding war, right? So there's a carrot there. And however cynically, it's Russia saying they respect democracy and support democracy, right? They say, but when we try to do democracy, you all say it has no legitimacy. So you've got to put together the team of election inspectors, whatever, whether it's the United Nations or whatever, the European Union or whatever. It's some international coalition is going to bring this together. However cynically you present yourself as supporting the future of democracy in Crimea, the future of democracy in Donetsk and Luhansk. But you also have the overt threat of saying, look, we already conquered Crimea by force. We just showed you within 3 days we can conquer Kiev, and then we withdrew, whether it's 3 days or 6 days, whatever it to be. It's like, do not doubt us. If you fail to keep your side of the bargain, if you fail to bring us through this legitimating democratic process, then this problem can be solved by force, right? So that is what I would have done if I had been in Vladimir Putin's position. And look, here we are 7 months into the war, approximately. Thumbs up from the audience. We only have 7 thumbs up at this moment. I don't know if that's because you're so aghast at what I've had to say politically. Thumbs up if you agree that this would have been a better strategy for Vladimir Putin. I can tell you one thing. Fewer people would have died. Far fewer people would have died on the Russian side. Far fewer people would have died on the Ukrainian side. And it would have pushed forward a solution that was both democratic and diplomatic. It would have empowered those international Western democratic agencies, and it would have at the same time empowered and legitimated Russia and Vladimir Putin and his government and so on. So I really think that was the winning strategy for him to play starting from day one. And it would have greatly minimized the use of force, would have greatly minimized the number of buildings that have been demolished, the disruption to the economy. It would have, Russia would not be in this position now where nobody is willing to buy their gasoline, their oil. Because there's this brief blitzkrieg, but now Russia has withdrawn and they've put themselves in this position, this kind of, morally pure position, in as much as war can have any moral purity to it, of saying that they are going to restrain themselves. They're going to pull their troops back into Belarus and say, look, all we are demanding is that you stop ridiculing the referendum we have. You recognize a referendum is an important form of democracy. Like, are you fucking kidding me? Oh, gee, when Canada had a referendum to decide the fate of Quebec, were all of you saying that was tyranny? Were all of you saying, oh, no, there just can't be any legitimacy to a referendum deciding whether Quebec should be a separate country or part of Canada? This is oppression. This is tyranny. This is a scam. Now, look, guys, I lived through that. There is a sense. There is a sense. There is a sense in which the referendum in Quebec was a kind of scam. There is. I think it's a very boring subject for you, but we can talk about how phony that kind of democracy was, at least in Canada at this moment. And we can contrast that to what I think are much more meaningful models of democracy from the ancient world. Kind of a topic for another video. But I'm just saying, I think that's a very powerful way for Russia, not just to manage this war, but to articulate their goals in a form that the vast majority of the Russian public would approve of morally, and that a significant percentage of people in Western democracies would approve of morally. Because then you're putting the onus on the other side. Then Russia is saying, look, we are willing to satisfy the requirements of Western democracy. You in America are not. You tell us when we have a referendum that this is just this horrible, oppressive conspiracy. Okay, well, show us how it's done. Show us how to have real democracy, a real referendum. Show us how to. Thanks for the comments, guys. I don't see that many thumbs up. So apparently less than half of the people in my audience right now agree with where I'm going with this political analysis. That's okay. Hey, thumbs down. Guys, legitimately, thumbs down if you disagree with the strategy I'm laying out here. But I think you can see also, if Putin had done this, if he'd followed my strategy, you're actually denying the Americans the opportunity to do what they've now done. Anyway, I think it would create a polarizing tension that certainly would have been good for Russia. And there's an interesting question to what extent that would have been better, for example, for the people of Crimea and for the people of Donetsk and Luhansk. Okay, a comment from Creative Nothing. A great name. Tell me something. Did you choose the name Creative Nothing because of my influence or because of Max Stirner? I think that's the only possible sources of the name Creative Nothing. I am a nihilist. I do talk about creative nothingness. I do have videos talking about Max Stirner. All right, man, a great name. Creative Nothing says, quote, I think you are underestimating the sheer cynicism of the Russian government and how it perceives the West as now. Okay. I am telling you what I think Vladimir Putin should have done. What you are doing is offering an explanation for why my suggestion was unthinkable to him, why he could not have thought of that. Fair. So, like, you're making a fair point, but that doesn't invalidate my point at all. So compare this to a criticism directed towards a movie. I can sit here and tell you for an hour how a recent Star Wars movie could have been better, could have been meaningful, right? And you say back to me, oh, but the people who made this movie, here are the reasons why they never would have thought of that. Fair. We're not disagreeing with each other. So look, you have a point. We could probably list off many, many reasons why the strategy I've proposed would have been inconceivable to Vladimir Putin personally, or to the small number of people whose opinions he listens to. Right. So Oliver has made something implicit, explicit here. If Vladimir Putin had followed the strategy I've just described, right, it would not make Putin look like a villain. So this is a huge issue in politics, though, too. Right now in America, the left is presenting a narrative that is coherent, but utterly factually wrong. And the right, conservatives and the people further to the right than the right wing, they're presenting a narrative that is totally incoherent, even though there are important elements of it that are factually correct. I can't say everything the conservatives and the right believe in is correct. I mean, they believe in Jesus. Okay, Jesus is just your imaginary friend. Jesus is much less real than Socrates. So obviously there are many things people on the right believe in that I think are utterly unreal. But when you go through kind of the platforms on both sides, the left-wing platform, the left-wing mandate, whatever, it is very coherent, but very fictitious, very counterfactual. And the right wing, the conservative mandate, platform, etc., there are really important elements of it that are just true, that are just real, that just really matter. There are things they're just correct about factually, but it's totally incoherent. How can anyone support the conservatives or support the right wing when, like, what the fuck are you supporting? Now, I have to say this again. I'm just going to repeat that very briefly about Russia. If you support Vladimir Putin, what the fuck are you supporting? It's totally incoherent. Now, Oliver is saying here the question of being a villain rather than a hero, right? Well, part of being a hero is having a coherent mission, mandate, story, right? Wherein the terrible things you do, the terrible crimes you commit are, for a good purpose. And look, I know this is a surreal comparison. I have to do this on my own YouTube channel. Why am I making YouTube videos joking about my sex life? Well, I think everyone who sees this video knows me well enough to see that there really is a point. Like, I am not just making jokes about having sex with an android named Floyd just to get a laugh out of you, just as in itself. There's a very clear political and even moral purpose to that kind of video, even though it's a comedy video. So it's a kind of ridiculous comparison, but I'm making it. Stick with me. That challenge of presenting your followers with a coherent moral vision of your purpose, right? Yeah, of course, I think Putin has utterly failed. Now, by the way, a contrast, most of you don't know Chinese politics this way. Legitimately, I would give some credit to Xi Jinping, the leader of China. I do not sympathize with Xi Jinping's politics. I do not support Xi Jinping, but he does put in the effort to present the Chinese people with a coherent with a coherent narrative that they can believe in, they may believe in. I think the majority do not. The vast majority of Chinese people do not accept what is now called Xi Jinping thought. Xi Jinping Zhu-yi, right? Xi Jinping ideology, they don't. But at least there is something there, and it's incredibly powerful. It's incredibly powerful to do that. So look, all of you guys writing in, each of you is in a different country and in a different political context. Do you have any political leader who gives you a narrative and a sense of purpose? Most of these guys are ruled by ad hocery. If you guys don't know, the term ad hoc is a bit of a political science term of art. Most of these people, okay, great example. The current mayor of New York. This guy is just making ad hoc decisions, coping with short-term crises. He's a very powerful political leader in America, the mayor elected to be the leader of New York. There is no narrative. There is no purpose, right? So he looks like a buffoon. And I think he is an imbecile. I think he's an incredibly stupid person. I think he's also an incredibly immoral person. I have no sympathy with the mayor of New York, ethically, intellectually, politically, or in any other sense. But you notice he has failed to put together that sense of mission. If he did have that sense of mission, if he said, look, here is the great thing I'm trying to accomplish. Therefore, I need you to sympathize with me because I am going to make many mistakes along the way to that great goal. I am even going to be guilty of many evils on the way to that greater good. Okay, now politically, you've got dynamite. But Vladimir Putin, he has utterly failed in this respect. And for any of you, you can really reflect within your lifetime. Look, again, guys, I don't only boast about the size of my cock. I'm great in bed. I don't only boast about being great in bed. There have been very few political leaders in the last 20 years who have understood politics in this sense as well as I have. And there was a surreal moment that Melissa was a witness to where I gave the best advice in the world to Jordan Reichert. If you don't know who that is, you can search within my YouTube channel. I've made a couple videos talking about him. Jordan Reichert is standing for election right now. Again, he's standing in elections here in Canada again. But, this was just a room full of idiots. And everyone had to wait their turn to speak. So I wait and 8 or 10 other people speak before me. And, I only have a few seconds to speak. And I gave this guy the best advice in the fucking world for his electoral campaign. I was like, look, I understand you're doing it this way, but this, and this is what you do. And it's like, guess what, Jordan? Guess what? There aren't a whole lot of other people here with the kind of background in political science I've got. It is funny for me to come into contact with people. You guys already know this about me. I knew Bob Ray for many, many years. I guess I still do. Bob and I, oops, nice spelling error there. Bob Ray. That is just a typo. I probably could have lunch with Bob Ray next time I'm in Toronto if I wanted to. Not really a priority for me, but I knew Bob Ray. Bob Ray still knows me. He's a major politician in the history of Canada. Let me tell you something. I've known people. Oh God, yeah. I'm thinking of people I knew in the mayor's office. Not literally. Sorry, in city government in Toronto. I don't mean the mayor himself, though it was true of the mayor at that time. But anyway, I'm thinking more of other people, city councilors, that they call them. I've known a lot of people who had very successful political careers who did not understand politics the same way that I do. I'm just saying the very simple moral to the story I've laid out here. In the last 20 years, how many politicians in your own country can you think of who even understood this cynically? Like, cynicism is not necessarily an obstacle to being a good politician. So I can think of a million different examples. You guys have probably heard of the governor of Michigan, who was responsible for this lead poisoning disaster that ruined so many people's lives. Take a look at that guy. I'm sorry, I don't remember his name at this moment. But frankly, you could look at any governor of Michigan. I mean, can you find a single speech he ever gave that in this sense is making him the hero rather than the villain, where he's saying to people, look, here is my great ambition for you and me and us together to have a better society. And I'm sorry, I'm going to make mistakes along the way. And I'm even going to do evil things in the pursuit of this greater good. But I need you to believe in me. I need you to support me, because together in the next 4 years or the next 2 years, whatever it is, here's what we're going to accomplish. That is really what political power comes from. Political power, both in a democracy and in a dictatorship, arises from convincing the masses that if you support me, your life will be better than it was 10 years ago. Your children's lives will be better than your grandparents' lives were. That there's going to be a short-term improvement and there's going to be an intergenerational improvement, right? Now, that improvement could be of many different kinds. It can be, all right now in America, reaching out to people and saying, look, you have struggled with student debt your whole life. Your parents struggled with student debt your whole life. Well, we are going to end this. Your children and grandchildren are not going to be burdened with student debt ever again. Because if you support me, even if I do evil things, terrible things, and mistakes are made along the way, even if some people die, even if there are some people killed, together in the next 4 years, we are going to change university education forever. And, even if I can't change your life right now, you have to recognize we're going to create this better society together, just through the reform of education, just through the reform, frankly, of even if it's just the cost of university education. You can see how there's a tremendous sort of power that arises from that. But this power can arise in a democracy, in a dictatorship, and in the various shades of gray between the two. And I think nobody in this audience would be surprised with how many massacres people will tolerate once they do have this sense of purpose. That's what political power comes from. Why do people pay taxes? It can't just be that they are afraid of going to jail. It has to be that at any given time, there is this sense of the positive purpose, the better society we're working towards building. And again, it can't just be static. It can't be the good society we already have now that we take. It has to be the better society and the purpose. And then you look at a millionaire who has the ability to relocate to Barbados, to relocate to the Turks and Caicos Islands, a millionaire who can move to Cyprus or Athens. You have a millionaire who says that he pays really high taxes in Canada. He's choosing to continue living in Canada, continue paying taxes in Canada, but he feels good about it because he knows he's building this better society in the future. He knows that his children and grandchildren are not going to have to deal with these, high rates of tuition for university. He knows that there is a better, a more just society. And it may even be, in Canada's case, it may be that he knows when he pays these taxes, it's going to address the history of genocide. It's going to actually help, create real meaningful equality for Indigenous people, for First Nations people. And it may be that he is paying those taxes because he hates the Russians and he wants a more aggressive military, regime, I want to say, more aggressive military policy in relation to the Russians too. Those things motivate people. It may be that he wants Canada to conquer more territory and expand. there may be all kinds of darker motivations there, that his idea of a better future may not be the same as yours and mine. I mean, obviously, people can be motivated by, um, they may be motivated by creating a better society that you and I would regard as horrendous. But the principle I'm explaining here remains the same in any case. Sorry. So Zippy Doda Quirk says, quote, most income taxes go towards the national debt. So are you stupid enough that you think that contradicts what I just said? It makes what I said even more true. It makes it even more important. If you are a millionaire who has a choice, what are you paying taxes for? You're paying taxes to build a better society in the future, right? You still have debt left over from World War II. So for some people, paying taxes is optional. They can just get a new passport, right? For some people, it's not optional, but they pay much lower taxes. If you're poor, what you pay in taxes is merely symbolic, okay? Your commitment to choose to keep paying taxes in Canada, a very high rate of taxes. England is another example. If you're a millionaire from England, many of them do relocate to Barbados or what have you, right? It absolutely includes dealing with the accumulated debt in the past, a debt that was built up, for example, by building universities and providing university education to poor people, by building roads and hospitals and sewage treatment plants and all of those things, you know. Yeah, you guys will have already gotten the point. I'm not demonizing millionaires here. I'm just saying they have a choice, and that there's not just a coercive element to their paying of taxes. They are not just paying taxes because they're afraid of going to jail. They are choosing to pay taxes in one place at one time because of something positive. Now, look, right now in Russia, okay, let's bring this back to Vladimir Putin in Russia. What if you were a multimillionaire with a Russian passport, and now you don't want to pay taxes to support Vladimir Putin anymore? Like, maybe up to this point, you've been kind of making your peace with it. You've been compromising and putting up with it. And now you hit a breaking point. You can move to Cyprus, baby. You could work it out in Thailand or something too. I don't know. Actually, no, I guess not Thailand. Maybe Cambodia. Anyway, Cyprus is not the only option. If you are a Russian multimillionaire, there are plenty of other countries that'll have you, maybe Barbados, whatever, some trouble. You can get another passport. You can start paying taxes to another government. You have a choice. Right now, as never before, I think you can imagine, there are Russian millionaires and billionaires who are making that choice. Some of them may also just move to the United States of America, get an American passport, become a wealthy Russian immigrant in America. If you've lived in London, England, the number of wealthy Russians in London has always been eyebrow raising. And some of those people, they've kept one foot in Russia and one foot in London. I think some of them now will be putting both feet down in London and saying that's it. They can't compromise with Vladimir Putin anymore. Mm-mm. Okay, so this brings me to the second and final segment of this video. What would I do if I were in Joe Biden's position? Now, already what I would have done was stated briefly in my videos 7 months ago. I think 7 months ago and 6 months ago, maybe still 5 months ago, I made a series of videos talking about the politics of the conflict in Ukraine and really talking about the world war extensions and implications of this. This is already a war that involves India. This is already a war that involves China. So there is really a meaningful sense in which you have to look at this as a world war, although obviously some countries are much more involved than others. Some are more committed than others. The level of commitment, the level of involvement is voluntary for everyone. Keep in mind, Joe Biden has the option of just saying to France, this is your problem. Saying to Germany, this is your problem. Joe Biden has always had the option of saying the United States of America would do nothing at all. Part of what I'm going to describe here is an overt and public campaign. And part of it is a secret campaign, at least up to a point. At some point, military operations have to be revealed when there are actually, bullets going into men, women, and children, to be blunt. Um, I do think that Joe Biden should have taken this as an opportunity to abolish NATO as it currently exists. I think on a large scale, that's the single most significant thing he could have done. There is an argument, especially right now, that he could abolish the United Nations as it exists, or at least kick the United Nations out of New York. There's a very clear moral argument that you can sell to the public saying it is not possible for the United Nations to do the job it was created for with Russia and China sitting on the Security Council with veto power. Now, that is just obviously true. This guy is a real idiot. Jesus. Sorry, guys. I mean, I love stupid people to a certain extent. What can I tell you, man? Once in a while, I got to ban someone. Jeez. There is a very clear moral argument that the United Nations was created especially to prevent a war in Europe of this kind ever happening again. I would love to pretend that the United Nations was created to prevent war in Africa or war between Cambodia and Vietnam. None of that is true. The United Nations was very much created for the purpose of containing and balancing Russian expansionism at the end of World War II. Now, keep in mind, for the Russians, World War II was an expansionary war. Russia increased its territory through the fighting of World War II. It also increased its sphere of influence, its sphere of power. Russia became stronger, not weaker, through World War II, even though they did so at an unimaginable price in terms of bloodshed. So, the raison d'etre for the United Nations is addressing and to some extent preventing, diffusing, de-escalating this conflict, this kind of conflict. And of course, this lays bare, this renders impossible to ignore the extent to which the United Nations is a joke. This is a very clear war of aggression on Russia's part. So in terms of the law of war, and the law of war only matters to a limited extent. I'm certainly not an idealist about the legal underpinnings of these things. You could say, okay, so, Ukraine did not invade Russia first. All right, guys, there's no ambiguity about that. This is a straight up expansionist imperialist war with Russia as the aggressor. And what we have seen demonstrated in the last 6 months, of course, is the United Nations is completely powerless to address it. Now, of course, there is an argument that the United Nations always was designed to be powerless. But regardless of the extent to which you're looking at flaws in the original design of the United Nations and the extent to which you are looking at dysfunction that crept in over decades of corruption and ad hocery, the United Nations neither serves the idealistic purpose it was created for, nor the purpose the government of the United States wants to put it to. Now, Ukraine isn't the only example. Cyprus, Turkey, Israel and its neighbors, Israel, Palestine, Israel, Syria. Oh yeah, gee, how about Syria? How about Libya? How about Cambodia? The United Nations has been a disaster in every single political theater it has inserted itself into, including even disaster relief in Haiti. So at some point, it would be appropriate for the government of the United States of America to lay bare its own intentions and say, look, on the one hand, the United Nations doesn't work. But on the other hand, it isn't working for us. This doesn't serve America's self-interest, both of which are true. Now, obviously, you can choose on a propaganda level to say instead that it doesn't serve the interests of democracy, of some fine ideal, which to some extent the United States does represent in its foreign policy, and to some extent its domestic policy, to some extent. But whether you are brutally honest about this just being about America's self-interest as opposed to Russia and China's self-interest, or if you are more idealistic in speaking the rhetoric of the promotion of democracy, of moving towards a more democratic planet, and in either case, this was really a moment that presented Biden with an opportunity to sweep aside the compromises and corruptions of the United Nations. Now, NATO is simpler, both in terms of its problems and its solution. Who benefits from NATO? There was some idiot here, I just banned him, talking about this as if Sweden is defending the United States. Are you fucking kidding me? You think America benefits from getting military support from Sweden? Is that how you think NATO works? NATO is a fucking charity the Americans run that benefit all these other fucking countries. It's not in America's self-interest. All right? Now, Sweden, that's an easy example for everyone here to visualize. What does America benefit from in defending Sweden? And now, conversely, like, what do you think Sweden offers America? What do you think? It's just a joke. I mean, it's just ridiculous. You think NATO is in America's self-interest? It's not. NATO is in the self-interest of the smaller partner countries. And the smaller they are, the more they benefit, like the more disproportionate the benefit, and the more puny the contribution of those small countries to the defense of the larger countries. All right, hypothetical scenario. What if Mexico started to have a communist government like Venezuela has, let's say even more so, like a really extremist communist government takes over Mexico, or let's say over the last 10, 20 years this had happened, and let's say Mexico actually starts to have, military conflict with the United States. Now, admittedly, it's not conceivable that Mexico would actually think they would conquer the United States, but let's say there's some of the low-level border crossing hostility that enemy nations have. Do you think America would be turning to Sweden? It would be turning to its partners in NATO and saying, hey, guys, you need to help us out. We have a border conflict with Mexico. Like, even if America if a nuclear missile struck America from Cuba is a communist country, it is an enemy. If there was some kind of punitive military incursion into American territory by the Cubans, you think America is going to ask for help from any of its NATO partners? Do you think America is going to say to Turkey, hey, you've got to help us out? Now, the more remote outposts of the American empire make this question even more interesting. Okay, Guam. Right now, go to Google Maps and put in Guam. Do you know where the fuck Guam is? The Northern Mariana Islands. Okay, those could be invaded. China could conquer. China could annex some of these tiny remote islands that are claimed as American territory. Gee, what do you think the response is going to be from Turkey? Do you think Turkey is going to declare war on communist China? Because China carried out a military intervention in one of these remote islands, Guam, Northern Mariana Islands, islands that are in some sense American territory. Now, on the other hand, Turkey is at war with everybody. To summarize, the current geopolitical situation for Turkey would be impossible. Turkey is pursuing quite a number of different military and political goals simultaneously with force. Okay? Now, all of Turkey's neighbors know they can't invade Turkey. They can't fight back because Turkey is a member of NATO. Right? Any invasion of Turkey, right? Any incursion into Turkey, the United States of America is supposed to respond to as if the United States of America itself had been invaded. Okay. So have you heard there is a war between Turkey and Cyprus? Have you heard there is basically a war between Turkey and Greece? Have you heard that Turkey is involved in every fucking conflict in North Africa, not just Libya? Have you heard that Turkey is involved extensively in the whole Syrian civil war crisis? They're fighting a whole lot of wars on a whole lot of fronts, backed up by the American military, whether the American taxpayer likes it or not. So the war with Russia, which is what it is, sparked by Russia's invasion in Ukraine. That was the opportunity for Americans to shut down the United Nations. I mean, like right now would be a great opportunity to do it and say, look, guys, the United Nations can't address the atrocities carried out by the Russians. They can't address this. They can't address that. They're like Russia sits there with a veto. I mean, the United Nations is controlled by Russia and China. I mean, it's really that simple. It's not only controlled by them, but that's not what America wants. Maybe that made sense. Honestly, I don't feel the United Nations ever made sense. I don't feel it ever worked. But if you feel the United Nations made sense in 1975, if that's how you feel, I don't really have to dispute that with you. You can make an argument about how wonderful the United Nations was in 1975. I don't believe it, and I can have a counter argument. But regardless, that's the past. Right now, the United Nations doesn't work for America. It doesn't work for the future of democracy. It doesn't work for Ukraine. It doesn't work for Cyprus. It doesn't work for Israel. It doesn't work for Taiwan. So let's fucking dump the United Nations. Let's create something better. And in saying that we would get rid of NATO, or that Joe Biden should have gotten rid of NATO, or that if I were in Joe Biden's position, I would have gotten rid of NATO. Dude, you only need one sentence to explain why we need to get rid of NATO. And here it is. Turkey, India. Does Joe Biden want to be in a military alliance with Turkey? No. Does Joe Biden want to be in a military alliance with India? Yes. How are you going to make that happen? Instead of having Sweden sign up to join NATO, you say, look, guys, this is the deal. We have a new military treaty organization. You know, I don't care if it's the same as the organization that replaces the United Nations. Like you can have two new organizations replacing two old organizations, or you could have, one new organization replacing both. And you say explicitly, guess what, guys? This is a military alliance that is for democracy. And you know what, Turkey? You're not really democratic enough. And you know what, India? You are. India is a democracy, kind of fucked up, but it's a democracy. And there's also, of course, that classic formulation of the enemy of my enemy is my friend. India and China are enemies. The United States and China are enemies. That's a nation of more than 1 billion people you want to be in a political alliance with. But guess what, Joe Biden? You wanted to have that political alliance just as a supplement to all the political alliances you've already got. And that's not going to fucking work. You are going to have to end some political alliances that people thought made sense in 1975. You know, it seemed like a really great thing to be in a political alliance with Turkey in 1975. I mean, again, I don't believe it, but maybe some people feel that way. You're going to have to end some alliances while initiating others. Now, Joe Biden's no fool. I think he overestimated the significance of the very gutsy move he made with Saudi Arabia. He made a very gutsy move in saying that the alliance with Saudi Arabia is over. At this moment, we have to ask the question, is it really? I think that most people feel that secretly Saudi Arabia and the United States have crept back together again. They've basically reformulated their alliance. They've knitted it back together again. And maybe there are some differences in the details. You know, maybe Saudi Arabia agreed to a few things. It would be a completely secret set of negotiations. But for whatever reason, day one, when Biden came into office, he made it really clear the alliance with Saudi Arabia is over. A brand new alliance with India is beginning. You ever had a crush on a girl and she doesn't love you back? India does not feel about the United States of America the way the United States of America feels about India. And India does not feel about Russia the way the United States of America feels about Russia. So you're in a fucked up situation where America is looking at India and saying, okay, we want one more alliance without sacrificing any of the alliances and commitments we've got. And India is basically looking at America and saying, okay, we'll take you on in this supplemental way too. But if you think for 1 minute we're going to cut off trade with Russia, if you think India is going to stop importing Russian gasoline, Russian cars, Russian tanks, Russian airplanes, Russian munitions, Russian war material, no. India is out for India, period. Now, after all these decades of hostility, now the United States all of a sudden wants to support India against China, theoretically wants to support India against Pakistan. For some reason, Joe, you didn't step up and commit to that. You could have. Joe Biden could have said loud and clear, Pakistan is now the enemy of the United States of America, and that they support India and they support democracy. You could have come out and said loud and clear, Pakistan always was your enemy in Afghanistan, but Barack Obama lied about it, which is the fucking truth. The United States of America pretended Pakistan was their ally, and Pakistan was their worst fucking enemy for the whole 18, 19 years of the Afghan war. Someone tell me exactly how many years and months was America's military presence in Afghanistan? I just said 18 or 19 years. I know it's under 20 years, but if you count the months, I'm not sure. I'm not sure if it's 19 years or not. India's agenda is pro-India, period. They're not anti-Russian. They're not pro-American. They don't give a fuck about Nepal. They don't give a fuck about Sri Lanka. They have more than 1 billion people to be responsible for. And their country is fucked up. They got problems, son. India's only priority is India. That's the way it has been for several decades. That's the way it's going to be for several decades. If you expect India to engage in suicidal acts of heroism for the future of democracy in Ukraine, for the future of democracy in Eastern Europe, for the future of democracy in Western Europe, you've got it wrong, son. No, that is not the game India is playing. All right. Inconceivable. And India is in a position to ask, I'm sorry. You expected great self-sacrifice from us? You expected us to stop buying Russian oil? You expected us to stop buying Russian munitions, tanks, airplanes? I'm sorry. Where is all this self-sacrifice for the future of democracy from Germany and France and Belgium and Switzerland? Yeah, let's put the Swiss on blast. It really is ridiculous to look to India this way. And the truth is, India at the elite level, they're not even anti-China. They're not. They don't hate the Chinese. They're quite happy to make money working with the Chinese. That's basically a relationship. I mean, put it this way. The nature of the competition between India and China is much more of a friendly competition than the competition between the United States and China. That's a really vicious, really invidious competition. Let's admit this. Fundamentally, what Americans want is for the future of China to resemble the future of America. They want China to become an American-style democracy. That's what they want, and that's what they saw happen in South Korea. That's what they saw happen in Japan. That's what they saw happen in Taiwan. Obviously, each of those countries has its own political system, its own economic system. They're not identical to American democracy. That is the ultimate American objective, is to transform China, to force China to have a new regime, a new political system, made in imitation of the United States of America. A little bit of influence from the British system of parliament, or French, or what. They don't give a fuck about the details. But in broad outline, that is America's agenda, right, for China. Do you think that's India's agenda? Do you think anyone in India, anyone, gives a fuck about compelling China to have a more democratic system of government the way India does? Do you think they want to force the people of China to have the same virtues that India has? The fucked up thing is, India doesn't even look at Nepal that way. They don't look at their immediate neighbors that way. They don't. Now, maybe they should. Maybe 100 years from now, things will change. That type of really deep political assumption, it can change, but it's not going to change in the next 6 months. I would be very surprised if the fundamental selfishness of India changes within my lifetime. But it's possible. Things do change. And, one of the ways things change is for the worse. Now, just to mention this is a really important source of political influence. No offense, most of you guys will not have thought of. I used to live in downtown Hong Kong. Okay. I used to walk past a cricket club. This is the sport of cricket in downtown Hong Kong. Who do you think was playing cricket at that club? Who do you think was watching cricket at that club in Hong Kong? The richest, the most powerful people from India would go to that cricket club. These are multi-billionaires who do business back and forth between India and Hong Kong, right? Those people, some of the most powerful people in India, who did their banking in Hong Kong, who played the stock market in Hong Kong, and who played stocks and bonds in Singapore. There's some there's some real inside baseball for you guys. If you were a multimillionaire in Asia in those days, you do multiple stages to your trip. Hong Kong for the stock market, Singapore for the bond market. That's how it used to be. They would have financiers in both of those places, right? Hong Kong and Singapore. They've been moving the money around. Well, they have seen what communist China did to Hong Kong, right? Even if they don't give a fuck about democracy, they have been forced to see the reality of what China is through Hong Kong. Now, beyond that, there are wealthy people from India who have been involved in factories in China. You do see that all the time. Whatever their involvement was, there have been businessmen from India going back and forth. Like, they work in the shoe industry, they work in the garment industry, they work in textiles, this kind of thing. There has been mutual awareness and mutual recognition over the last 20 years. This is not an exotic and strange place to the wealthy elite of India. So there is a sort of irresistible politicization of the Indian elite. And the Indian elite, the wealthiest people of India, I will say this, they are becoming more pro-American with each passing day. They used to hate America, even within my lifetime. The hatred of America in India was intense. Highly educated English-speaking people in India hated the United States of America. Why? It's a long story. You could say a lot about it, but two reasons real quick. What most people will emphasize is the Vietnam War. What I would emphasize was America's role under Nixon in supporting China and supporting Pakistan in their wars against India. And yeah, those were small-scale wars, but people in India really cared. So guess what? When the chips were down, when it mattered, when it really counted, the United States of America was an ally of China and Pakistan, not India, against India. And as I've just mentioned, the American alliance with Pakistan, however phony, that continued all the way through Barack Obama. I think we still don't know to what extent Donald Trump personally was anti-Pakistan. We just don't know. I'm not saying it's impossible to know, but I'm guessing someone is going to write a book at some point about what really happened Look, journalism is dead, but I wouldn't be surprised if Donald Trump and his advisors were cynical about the relationship with Pakistan in a way that Obama was not. And that's partly because Trump was willing to make an enemy out of China. You might even say he was eager to make an enemy out of China, but Biden has gone much further. In terms of foreign policy, Biden has not been an anti-Trump. It's been hyper-Trumpism. Biden was not the antidote to Trump. He went much, much further in the same direction. Okay, I'll take a moment here to read your comments because some comments have come in. Totally good question from Clouds. Clouds, if you're a Patreon supporter, just watch the video I shared before this one because I talked that through at some length. The way in which my current commitment to making satire on the channel means that videos of this kind, whether they are live streams or not, will become Patreon exclusive. So if you want to see this kind of content on my channel, you have to pay the $1. That's basically what it is. But I do reflect on that and talk about that at greater length in a video that is already Patreon exclusive and that I recorded just over 1 hour ago, immediately before recording this one. So that's where you'll hear that reflected on. Sat12 asks, quote, what is the future of U.S. influence in the world if Russia and China keep teaming up? I continue, quote, if we look at the world with its increased climate threats to food supply, this is irrelevant. Okay, I like the first part of your question. I think the second part is ridiculous. Look, the war as it's currently unfolding in slow motion is totally in America's economic interest. It is totally contrary to Western Europe's economic interest. It is totally contrary to Russia and China's economic interest. So currently, Russia, China, and Iran are in a military and economic alliance. And it's a totally cynical military and economic alliance. Sometimes they include North Korea in that list. Sometimes they don't because North Korea is an embarrassment to everyone involved. America could not have isolated Russia, China, and Iran more than they have now done to themselves. Like the long-term devastation, we should define long-term. Over 5 years, over the next 5 years, America never could have done this much damage to Russia, China, and Iran. America could not have inflicted it upon them. They have inflicted it upon themselves to a mind-blowing extent. This is not in China's economic interest. This is dramatically counter to the economic interest of all three countries. This will have a corrosive effect, an enfeebling effect on all three countries. It already is, but it will get worse and worse as time goes on. Now, that is exactly why America wants India to come in strongly on the pro-American, anti-Russian, anti-Chinese side. Of course, they'd love it. They'd love it if India were also anti-Iran. This is also why America wants Japan to adopt this pro-American position, and Japan has refused. Japan is completely finked out, in brief. So that was obvious to me from day one. And I thought the Western Europeans, countries like France and Germany, I thought they would understand very clearly what I understood from day one. It is in Western Europe's interest, and it was from day one, whatever I say, 6 months ago, 7 months ago, 8 months ago. It was in Western Europe's interest to fight a hard, fast, decisive war. Western Europe benefits from that. If they can trounce the Russians, defeat the Russians, drive them out of Ukraine, and renormalize, that is in Western Europe's interest. That's not in America's interest. It is in America's interest to sit back and let this simmer, again, whether it's for 5 years or 10 years, because the longer this simmers, the more powerful America becomes and the weaker Western Europe becomes. I've spoken to several Patreon supporters about this directly, one-on-one. I think you really cannot imagine how devastating, how enfeebling this is for Germany. how devastating and enfeebling this is for France, even for Spain. Go through the whole list. The longer this goes on, factory by factory, the weaker European manufacturing becomes. And once those factories close down in Germany, they will reopen somewhere else. In the year 2022, a factory closes in Germany. The same product is going to be manufactured in Mexico, in China, in Honduras, in Indonesia, in Malaysia. Oh, every single thing Germany creates, everything they make in a factory, there is some other country somewhere in the world that already is making it, that can expand their operations. And there are countries elsewhere that will be very happy to, I'm sorry, but none of this technology is secret. I'll give you an example. Microphones are made in Germany. You know, the expensive luxury quality microphones are not made in China. They're made in Germany. Okay, so you have this ultimately military economic disruption, which is partly a disruption of the supply of gasoline and energy production. Okay, so if the microphone factory closes down in Germany, do you think 5 years from now it's going to be able to reopen and compete? Never will. When the car factories close down in Detroit and new factories open in Mexico, not only in Mexico, I mean, some of that production was in Japan, some was in China, but the single most obvious transfer was of manufacturing relocating from Detroit to Mexico. Oh, do you think you can get that back? Like, you think you can rebuild the automotive industry in Detroit? Do you think you can? No. All right. This is already devastating to Western Europe now. And I can't believe the leaders of Western Europe didn't understand this as well as I did, or better, because I understood that day one. I understood what the threat was to Western European hegemony, Western European power, which is partly economic, partly military, partly political, partly cultural, all these things, right? This situation will create a monopolar world, period. This creates a world dominated by Washington, D.C., with no opposition. As long as this situation goes on, Berlin is powerless and only becoming weaker month by month, year by year. Paris is becoming powerless. So on for Brussels, whatever you want to say. This hobbles Western Europe. Now, I could get into a bunch of hypotheticals about the ways in which economies are integrated and the way in which these. I think you guys don't want more detail about what the economic effects are. And by the way, I also just feel confident. What I'm saying now, it'll probably click that you've actually read things in the newspapers and heard things on the news. And you're like, oh, yeah, I guess I have heard about those factories shutting down. I guess, yeah. And I guess the propaganda message is, don't worry, it's only temporary. But now that he says this, yeah, I guess that is just propaganda. I'm thinking I don't have to get into the economics too much, because this probably kind of resonates with or clicks with things you've been hearing, however deceptive and dishonest. Quote, India is sentimental about Russia because they supported India when the chips are down. Yes, but Manan, that's exactly the same period I'm talking about. That's 1971. Now, it's true, but before and after. It was true in the 1960s. It was true in the 1980s and 1990s. But crucially, Russia supported India when they had a war, a real war with China. Russia supported India when they had a war with Pakistan, right? So yes, that counts for something. I wouldn't even call that sentimental. And guys, the Russians make great military equipment. They make great military hardware at a great price. So, India also, they want those tanks, they want those guns, they want those airplanes, so on and so forth. Okay, so look, my point is this: long, slow, indecisive conflict that creates a world dominated by Washington, D.C. And if you think Iran and China and Russia together are going to exert some kind of like it's going to be a bipolar world, you are fucking delusional. There is absolutely no meaningful opposition provided by those three countries working together. It's a laughingstock. It's a joke, even for countries like Kazakhstan. So there's a number of these countries in Central Asia who are indicating as politely as possible No, 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 no. They're going to fuck with the Americans. If you are Kazakhstan or you are Mongolia, you're saying, no, no, no. We want to keep having friendship with America and Japan and Western Europe. This is not convincing to us at all. Whatever. I mean, I can't go through all these Central Asian republics, but these are small, powerless countries that really do depend on cooperation with Russia. But they have been saying loud and clear they are not willing to become the next North Korea in order to support the insane ambitions of two men, Xi Jinping and Vladimir Putin. And there isn't any ideology there. It's not like there's communism to justify it. What the fuck are these people supposed to believe in? What are you telling the people of Uzbekistan and Mongolia to believe in? Why should they support, your objectives? So no, this is not a new Cold War. This is not a bipolar world. If this continues, it creates a monopolar world. And I'm sorry, my judgment is that this is simply an error made out of ignorance, stupidity, and cowardice in Western Europe. They could not appreciate that strategically it was in their interest to be 10 times more committed to war with Russia than the United States. They should have been way more bellicose, way more aggressive. They are the ones who have something to win and something to lose. And the United States, keep in mind, guys, the relations between the United States and Western Europe, they're friendly, but they're not really friends. Do you think Washington, D.C. likes what France has been doing in Libya? They don't. Do you think Washington, D.C. likes what France has been doing in Syria, in Egypt, throughout North Africa, the so-called Great Lakes region of Africa? What France's policy has been in the Sahel of North Africa? Nope. America doesn't really like any of that shit. French foreign policy pisses the Americans off. They don't really want to put up with it. Now, conversely, do you think that America feels grateful towards France because of France's support of America's hostility towards China? No. Like, America doesn't feel that it's really supported by France, et cetera, et cetera. So, you have to remember, America and France, America and Germany, they are friendly, but they are not really friends. The United States of America is very happy to sit back and watch Western Europe destroy itself in terms of political credibility, destroy itself economically, destroy itself in terms of its potential to be the leader of the free world, whatever you want to say. They are happy to sit back and let that happen. And of course, they're even happier to watch China, Russia, and Iran destroy their own economic position. Now, I think there is a real question here of how happy or unhappy the United States is with how Japan has played this game. I've already stated they're very unhappy with how India has played this game. Okay, so the point of this is not just to describe and analyze the current situation. It's to talk about hypothetically what I would have done or what I would do now. So let me just make sure I'm getting the name right. I believe we refer to this region as Königsberg. Right. So people say Königsberg. They also say Kaliningrad, if you don't know where this is. It has more names than just that. So if you guys do not know what the fuck Kaliningrad is or what the fuck Königsberg is, right. Thank you, William. This is what I would do if I were Joe Biden. Okay, so great. Some answer questions from the audience. I'm happy to answer here. Chia Seed Pudding asks, why is the war bad for China, though? China's whole economy relies on selling exports to the United States. This is a short answer. Now, that's not the only answer. I could get into, there are actually many, many other ways in which this is really a bad thing for China. But China needs its friendship with the United States much more than the United States needs friendship with China. The extent to which China can economically survive by manufacturing and exporting things to Western Europe without the American market, well, okay, that is going to at least cut the Chinese economy in half. Now, I'm just being brief. That's a good answer, but that's not the whole answer. There are many, many other ways in which the end of friendship and cooperation between China and the United States is bad for China. But hey, one more. if you were the dictator of China, how positively would you feel about the Americans now having strategic cooperation with India and not you? India is your enemy. So there are many ways. China would prefer that America support China and not support India. Well, that's how it used to be after Nixon. It's not like that. So there are many ways in which this is already a loss for China. What do you think the total dollar value is of exports from China to Russia and from China to Iran? Add that up. It's nothing. They're now exporting beer from China to Russia, which they didn't do before. They didn't do very much of. Well, what's the value of China's exports to the United States, France, Germany? That will put those numbers in perspective. Okay, sorry. So good question, but you did kind of derail what I was saying. Okay. Kaliningrad, also known as Königsberg. If I were Joe Biden, I would have been going around saying loud and clear, if Western Europe does not intervene militarily, if you do not solve this problem yourselves, America will, and we will permanently occupy, we will permanently annex, we will keep as a colony the territory we conquer. We are not going to do, again, what we did in Afghanistan. We're not going to conquer Afghanistan just to give it back to the Afghanis. Nope. The new set of rules we're playing by. Western Europe, you should solve this problem in Eastern Europe. It should be coming out of your military budget. It should be your men fighting and dying. It should be your blood being spilled for the future of democracy in Europe, period. And if you fuck up, if you are cowards, if you fail, we are not going to conquer this territory just to hand it back to the people who live there and say, okay, you guys rule yourselves. We are not going to hand it back to Europe and say, okay, now you can be a part of the EU. This is going to become an American territory permanently, just like Guam. This is going to become an unincorporated territory of the United States. You in Europe are going to have a direct land border with the United States of America. That's what's going to fucking go down if you don't give this all you've got to win this war without the American army putting its boots in the ground. We are done. And you know what? Sorry, I gave the comparison of Guam. How about Guantanamo? There's going to be an unincorporated territory under American sovereignty as a result if you leave this up to us to solve it. And you can totally make an argument that the American taxpayers should not support this war if they do not benefit in some way. And guess how they can benefit? You can have a holiday home in Kaliningrad, right? Kaliningrad can become I don't even mean the 51st state. It doesn't have to become a state. You don't have to give them any of those rights. You can just rule it as a territory, an unincorporated territory, as an American territory. This same argument has to be made to the Japanese in a very powerful way, where you say, look, Japan has been at war with Russia continuously since World War II. This is your problem to solve. The United States of America shouldn't have to do it for you. But if we do, if we have to intervene, if we have to go to war with Russia, we are not going to give you back Sakhalin Islands. We are not, I said plural. Sakhalin is one island, but there's a set of several islands. They normally say the Kuril Islands in English. We are not going to give you back the disputed territories that you've been saying you want back for 50 years. We are not going to conquer this. We are not going to kill and die and go into debt with our military budget to conquer this and hand it back to the Japanese people. If you do not step up and fight your own wars, guess what? You are going to have a land border with the United States of America. Sakhalin Island can become a territory of the United States, just like Guam. So what I am proposing here is a return to the Realpolitik of the 18th century. to bring back a sense of realism that war has outcomes, that the purpose of war is not just to stage manage a regime change, like, oh, like that worked out really well in Iraq, huh? That worked out really well in Afghanistan. And to pretend that conquest is something other than conquest, that conquest is a humanitarian undertaking, is to really embrace the reality that no, being conquered by the American military means territorialization. It means the border moves. It means that now this is an unincorporated territory of the United States, like so many others that America conquered in the past, that conquest will mean conquest. So, okay, Japan, if you feel uncomfortable about that, maybe it's time for you to fight your own wars. Okay, Western Europe, if you feel uncomfortable with that, I mean, hey, if our positions were reversed, I would feel uncomfortable too. Maybe it's time for you to fight your own wars. Because you know what Bill Clinton did in Yugoslavia? We don't play by those rules anymore. We are not going to fight a war in Yugoslavia for the people of Yugoslavia. That makes no sense. The United States of America is going to fight wars for the United States of America, period. And that's the only thing that's reasonable to ask the taxpayers of the United States of America to support. So if we're talking about a world war against Russia, all these other countries, they have to cease being politically dependent, militarily dependent, economically dependent, but also like emotionally dependent on this idea that the American army is going to hold up the umbrella for them anytime it rains. All right. I have mentioned other specific forms of military escalation that I would recommend the United States engage in against Russia. And that, again, hypothetically, if I were Joe Biden, I would engage in. I think that Mongolia is a unique opportunity. I think if you put a very small army base in Mongolia and have a treaty with Mongolia, again, whether or not this is part of a new pro-democracy treaty that replaces NATO, like with or without a greater international strategy, if you say to Mongolia, look, you are a democracy, we recognize that you are pro-democracy, we sign this alliance, it could be the tiniest little base of the US Marine Corps that would terrify both Russia and China. And it would say, guess what? Now the US Army is here. You have a permanent presence in our ally, Mongolia. If you don't know, Mongolia has borders with both communist China and Vladimir Putin's Russia. That is a really effective way to escalate the tensions and give you a bargaining chip. Oh, what were we negotiating? Were we negotiating an end to the Ukraine crisis? Oh, well, now you have something you can offer in return. Oh, you would like us to sign a treaty in which we promise not to have this military base in Mongolia anymore. Is that what you want? Well, what's Russia going to have to give you in return to get that? See, this is the kind of leverage you need, not in escalating a war, not in fighting a war, but in ending a war. You have to put yourself in a position in which you have something to sacrifice. You have something to give to the other side when you sign the peace treaty. So that's a great example. Now, as you may know, or you may not know, Mongolia is not the only opportunity. What about Georgia, right? There's been this long, slow dance between the United States and Georgia. There's been this long, slow dance between Western Europe and Georgia. Well, it's time to pump up the volume. It's time to dance to a faster kind of tune. Obviously, again, you can simply put a permanent military presence in Georgia. And if Russia doesn't like that, we could negotiate a treaty, Russia. Do you now want to negotiate a peace treaty in which you agree, for example, to give up all claim to Crimea, whatever the fuck it was, in exchange for America agreeing to demilitarize, to remove its presence from Georgia under certain terms and conditions? Oh, is that what you want? You have to give the Russians something they want. You have to put them in a position where Russia is wanting something you can give them when you sign that peace treaty at the end of the conflict. Joe Biden is not a fool, but he's also not a military man. Joe Biden is much more intelligent and cynical than Barack Obama. but he is probably not intelligent enough to win this war, and not intelligent enough to make the most of the opportunities that this particular conflict presents us with, to maximize the positive outcomes that are possible. I mean, again, I think the issue of challenging the United Nations illustrates that very well. He is not making the most of this opportunity. And in order to do so, I don't actually think it would bankrupt the United States. I don't think that would cost too terribly much money. Now, I think the other problem there is not just the lack of brilliance on Joe Biden's part, but that Joe Biden is fundamentally a status quo thinker. He is basically just trying to maintain and defend what he thinks of as normalcy. He doesn't really have an ambition for a better world, for a more democratic world. I don't believe Joe Biden has a vision for a more democratic United States of America. I don't. I think Joe Biden sees himself as working towards the restoration and defense of a kind of normalcy that he associates with the past, maybe even just the past before Donald Trump. I mean, Joe Biden's a very old man. He's probably, I mean, okay, you can ask yourself, is he trying to go back to what he felt was normal during the Obama years? Is he trying to go back to what he thought was normal during the Bill Clinton years? Maybe it's his own teenage years. I mean, maybe it's, a whole different idea of what's normal. But he's, yeah, I think Joe Biden is fundamentally a backward-looking leader rather than a forward-looking one. And that's why there are these bizarre unanswered questions. Okay, so Biden, you stabbed Saudi Arabia in the back. Like, from Saudi Arabia's perspective, that was fucking dirty. And for the next 30 years, the Saudis are not going to forget what you did to them. Really. Like, this is deadly serious from Saudi Arabia's perspective. Okay, but then what? What did he get out of it? What did he accomplish? Like, what was the next domino? There was nothing. And it seems like instead he's moping his way back to accepting Saudi Arabia as a strategic partner again. Okay, so you stab Saudi Arabia in the back, but you're still trying to be best friends with Turkey? It makes no sense. It kind of comes from nowhere and it's going nowhere. So yeah, in this sense, and look, we've all talked about already enough the issue with India and what his strategy was there. China was hoping that when Joe Biden was elected, it would be the end of the anti-China rhetoric from Donald Trump, and it would begin a new period of positive economic cooperation between China and the United States, positive relations of some kind. They were hoping they would go back to the type of positive relationship they had with Bill Clinton and with Barack Obama. Okay, well, surprise. As I say, Bidenism is hyper-Trumpism, most clearly in relation to China. Okay, but what is the next domino? Like, what is the next step in that strategy? Because the truth is, so far, that has gone fucking nowhere. So yeah, I don't think Biden is a fool, and he is certainly not a man lacking in ambition. He has already left an indelible stamp upon the world. But I think both Western Europe and Japan, who are, when you think about it, it's surreal, but Russia is in the middle. There's Russia. On one side, it has Japan. On one side, it has Western Europe. I think both Western Europe and Japan have been sleepwalking through history for maybe the past 20 years. They have not taken seriously what the commitment to democracy means, what the pursuit of a more democratic planet would entail. Now, some of that commitment is inward looking, asking tough questions about how democratic Japan really is in terms of the relationship between the citizens and their government, how democratic each of the countries in Western Europe really are. There's a certain inward looking dimension to it. But when you start looking outward, we have all these vestiges of the Cold War era. We're in an alliance with Turkey. Why? We're in an alliance with Saudi Arabia. Why? We're in an alliance with communist China. Or, we were up until the election of Joe Biden. None of these things make any sense. And, again, we have lived through the death of democracy in Hong Kong. Nobody did anything about it. Oh, China did something about it, but you know what I mean? There wasn't a pro-democratic response. We've lived through the death of democracy in Myanmar. We've lived through the death of democracy in Cambodia too. Okay, we've been living through a period. I'm sorry, this is not a complete list. As Joe Biden himself says, of an expanding sphere of dictatorship, autocracy. We certainly lived through the death of democracy in Afghanistan, you know. And guys, you tell me, when did democracy die in Russia? Because it wasn't the day Vladimir Putin was elected, right? Russia used to be a democracy, and gradually in the Putin era, I mean, there's Putin and there's also Medvedev, but we basically say in the Putin era, gradually Russia ceased to be a democracy, and then it actually became an anti-democracy. So we've been living through an era in which democracy has been losing, and what could be called anti-democratic regimes have been winning. But the problem is, the United States of America says that Iran is their enemy, not Saudi Arabia. Iran is their enemy, not Turkey. You know, you need to have a coherent strategy that is pro-democracy and anti-dictatorship, or whatever you want to say. And then you really need to galvanize your allies to fight for that. And of course, it's very unfortunate. Your allies in Western Europe are certainly disillusioned by their experience in Afghanistan. Oh, I remember. I am old enough to remember the optimism of 2001, 2002, 2003. All these happy Western European countries said that they were going to do their part. They were going to build the new utopia in Afghanistan. Well, holy shit. A lot of cynicism about the American military, about American democracy, about American foreign policy. A lot of cynicism about the possibility of the United States of America ever playing a positive role in the promotion of democracy overseas has crept in through 19 years of experience, or however long it was, in Afghanistan, right? Okay, I appreciate all of that. I appreciate that deeply. But the time has come now to say to Japan, look, you have to set aside the memory of World War II. To say to Germany, you have to set aside the memory of World War II. And to say to everyone, we have to set aside the memory of the war in Afghanistan, which it's not such ancient history that you've all become so cynical about. And guess what? Here's the new ideology. Here's the new game plan. And you are going to have to fight and die. You are going to have to commit your own people, to fight for this. It cannot be that the United States Marine Corps serves as a mercenary army on behalf of Western Europe, on behalf of Japan, on behalf of everyone else's interests, in the same way that shamefully, the U.S. Army has indeed been serving as a mercenary force, working for the interests of both Saudi Arabia and Turkey for all these years. Two countries that should be America's allies, but that are and have been America's. Did I say that the wrong way? Saudi Arabia and Turkey, two countries that should be America's enemies, but that have been America's allies. And on that, we are out.